All right, you ready to
Sorry
rock
about
and
that.
roll?
Yep.
All right. Well, good morning. This is Lyle Hanna with the Hanna Resource Group, and we're delighted to have you back. This is our sixth in a series, 6 weeks. Will COVID-19 ever be run out of our communities? We're going to talk about crisis management for COVID-19. We're going to talk about CARES and legal updates. So we've got Healthy at Work. We've got some great guests today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're glad you're on the call. If you've been on before, you know we keep it pretty casual. We love your questions. You notice the little chat bar down at the bottom. You're welcome to write things in there, and we'll monitor that throughout the whole call and pass on those questions to our speakers. Jim, you want to give me the next slide, and we'll move right along here.
Yes, sir.
All right, look at this panel of guests. You guys all know me, I hope, but if not, I've got a little background there. But the really important people are Jim Morris. He's an attorney. He's been on this call for 6 weeks. He really got a head start on this thing because he had a client out of state that had a problem before it even became, it was just becoming an issue when it started. So he's been great to share with us. He's going to give us an update. We've got Jim Gray on here. Many of you recognize his smiling face. You know, he was our mayor for 8 years in Lexington, just did a super job. He's stepped up to be the Secretary of the Transportation Cabinet for Governor Andy Beshear. And as a part of that, he's been asked to serve on Andy's Kentucky COVID-19 task force. So he's here to share what's going on with the state government. And I think it'll be a great input. I think you'll get a kick out of hearing about it. We also have Brian Richter. Brian hails out of Nashville, but he works with a lot of folks in Kentucky. And he's going to share with us stuff about PPE. You've heard about that lately. How do you get it? Do you need it for your business? You're darn right you do. And he's going to give you a way to get it, but he's really just he's going to educate us on why it's important and how these different things are used. I think you'll find it really interesting. And then you notice Allison is on here, and she's going to continue to share with us the questions that come in and other things that are going on. So let's move on to the first area. I think it's going to be Jim Gray is going to kick us off. And here's the agenda as it lays out. We got Healthy at Work update with Jim. Then we've got legal and regulatory things with James, the other Jim. And then we've got risk management, some cleaning things that I'm going to share. And then we're going to talk about keeping calm and squashing the curve. And that's going to be Brian. All right, Jim, take it away.
Okay. Hey, Lyle, thanks a lot. And thanks everybody for joining the call. I think, Lyle, you had reached out for the governor to join this team to get today, this group discussion today. He was not able to. And I wouldn't say that you got second best at all, but you got somebody that he consented to. How about that?
We know we've got the A team. That's all that matters.
Listen, well, I appreciate everything that you do. We've worked together for a very long time. Even with our family business, we worked together, and you always did outstanding work in that area. Actually, I come to this role with the task force in many respects because the governor said he wanted someone with business experience and someone who'd actually gone through adversity. And I was able to meet that. I was able to meet that criteria because I told him, I said, Governor, I've gone through 4 recessions. And in 2009, I thought it was probably the worst that I've ever seen. And then we are dealing with what we have today, which is arguably, and I know for many of you out there on this call, it represents uncharted waters, unprecedented experience. The slide that's up now, I'm going to come back to that, but first I want to give a little bit more context. When the entire idea and notion of coming back to work and restoring our opportunities for the economy to reframe itself, when that emerged just 3 weeks ago now, it seems like an eternity, but when we went into this, the governor was already thinking about how we're going to come out of it. And what this really amounts to is establishing a framework. Healthy at Work is all about a framework. Let's back up, James, on that slide. Let's don't go to the two-phased approach quite yet.
Okay. Sorry.
All right. I want to spend just a bit of time on that planning, patience, and perseverance slide. But first, the overall context is establishing a framework to reopen the economy in a deliberate and a thoughtful way. And the governor says it best. He says, you know, we don't have to be the fastest, but we do need to be smart about this and can be the smartest. He often talks about in his daily briefings sacrifice. And he has added what I call the 3 Ps to that: planning and patience and perseverance. And really, those are the touchstones for this effort that is underway today. There's nothing casual about it. It's almost a 24/7, I would say, effort by the team. As soon as I get off this call, I'm going to a call with the team. And it's all about doing this in a thoughtful way, in as efficient a way as we can, with still public health being at the forefront. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if you've been watching the governor's daily briefings, what you know is that we're talking today about a 2-phased approach. Phase 1 is a state readiness evaluation. The governor has determined already whether Kentucky has certain public health benchmarks, and that is a continuing exercise. We'll get into that in the next slide. And additional information will be released as benchmarks are met. Phase 2 is a business readiness evaluation. So let's go to the next slide. So the benchmarks for reopening the economy include 14 days of decreasing cases. Now, that's not a straight line, and the governor has emphasized this. It's not necessarily a straight line, but it's a trend. In addition, increasing testing capacity and contact tracing. And what you all know, I'm sure, is that Louisville is opened and Lexington is opened for more testing, and Bowling Green will be open for more testing this week, drive-through. Additional benchmark is the personal protective equipment, PPE availability. I think we're going to hear more about that on the call today. The ability to protect at-risk populations. What we know is, of course, that the most vulnerable today are those in the older age groups. Nursing homes, for example, of course, we know that represents the at-risk populations. The ability to social distance and follow CDC guidelines on large gatherings, another benchmark. Preparedness for the possibility of a future spike, and then the status of vaccine and treatment. All of these represent benchmarks. Now, I want to emphasize that what the governor's emphasized is it's fluid, and there's flexibility in this. And the reason for that is if we see more favorable trends coming, and we've got some models out there, frankly, with what Georgia's doing. Now, we're not going to see evidence of that very quickly, but some states that have moved more aggressively, we will be seeing modeling there. Monday, that is today, begins the gradual restart and the reopening, and that is healthcare facilities, phase 1 healthcare facilities and services. Clearly they must operate under the CDC guidelines. But one of the the reason for this is, as the governor has illustrated and shared, reason for this is healthcare practitioners are among the best in terms of having protocols already in place. Again, it's a modeling opportunity for us. Okay, let's go to the next slide, James. So just to dig in, double click into this healthcare services reopening. On the 27th, it is today resuming non-urgent, emergent healthcare services, diagnostic radiology and lab services in hospital outpatient settings, healthcare clinics and medical offices, physical therapy settings and chiropractic offices, optometrists, and dental offices. Now, this guidance importantly does not apply to long-term care settings, prisons, other industries, other settings for where there will be separate guidance already issued or will be in the future. The dental offices, the dentistry profession is working with Dr. Stein itself to provide more detail in the way that they will be practicing in the dental offices. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, phase 2, and I'm sure many of you on the call probably are focused on phase 2. The governor is already evaluating economic sectors. That's part of the task force work, and individual businesses' ability to safely reopen while maintaining appropriate health and safety measures. We're encouraging the submittal of proposals discussing the strategy and the challenges related to safely reopening to aid in the sectors. Now, submitting is not a requirement to reopen. And what we're working toward here are sector groupings, where, for example, an association representing Kentucky, let me give an example. Kentucky Association of Manufacturers already has prepared a proposal outlining how it will follow the guidelines, the guidance, and the requirements. And the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers has linked itself with other states and their groups in other states, other manufacturers and associations in other states. So we're getting these proposals, and the idea is to work with the business community in putting these plans together. Now, once the sector is reopened, all businesses in that sector can reopen, provided they implement all the recommended health measures. Okay, all right. Businesses currently open do not need to submit proposals to remain open. They will need to comply with standards set for their sectors. Now, let me also, in phase 2, reopening applications asks businesses to consider the following: phased employee return to work, presence of safety officers, essentially those who are responsible, someone in an organization. I always say where everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So the presence of safety officers is important. Limiting face-to-face meeting and common areas. Employees would be provided with leave options. Minimizing travel is encouraged, and supplying PPE to employees. Now, it's important in this last supplying PPE to employees to mention just what the governor mentioned yesterday, and that is that PPE will not be available from public sources. This would be private sector, private supply chain sources. Okay, let's go to the next slide now, James. All right. Governor also asked that reopen applications ask businesses to consider the following in addition. This is continuing from the previous list: mandating employees and customers wear masks, conducting employee health and temperature checks, screening employees for exposure to positive persons, sanitizing according to the CDC guidance, accommodations for vulnerable populations, and reporting of positive tests. Now, I wouldn't particularly use the language disclaimer there, but I would want to say that it's important to recognize that these are still early days, and that means flexibility. When you think about the enormity of the task that we have both undertaken in the last 6 weeks and the task ahead of us, we all know that there's nothing casual about it, and we can't be cavalier about it. So it's still the early days. So that means that the guidelines and the protocols, the procedures may still change. In fact, they've already evolved since the original communication. Original communication was talking about individual businesses. That was in order to get out, to allow some businesses who wanted to get into the stream, go ahead, get their plan in place and submit it. And it frankly would give us modeling opportunities. But also what we've been doing is encouraging this association model. Kentucky Retail Federation, Automobile Dealers Association, the Kentucky Association of Manufacturers that I mentioned earlier. So that's bringing broad groups, broad industry sectors together. Also want to mention that the Chamber of Commerce is staying very involved, the state chamber and local chambers. We had a call that was initiated by the state chamber with local chambers on Friday of last week. The governor was on that call, and I believe there were as many as 75 chambers on the call then. So, Lyle, now I'm happy to take, if you got some questions there or some comments.
Great.
And let me put another little quick disclaimer that my grandfather was a country doctor, and I learned early on not to try to practice medicine from him. So if the questions have to do with the medical side and the science side and the clinical side, it might, I will say to please give a number to Lyle or he's got my phone number sometimes on speed dial, so he can get in touch with me and I'll get back with anybody with an answer.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. That was a great overview. And I've got one just to start with. I wonder, so if you're already, if some people are still open, they haven't completely closed. So
right.
but they need to step up and adopt some of all these processes, these systems, so they have a clean environment and they're testing people and they're tracking people and so forth. Is there somebody that's going to do some oversight on this? They say,
well,
we do what we measure. Is that in terms of regulatory or regulating or compliance? The Labor Cabinet has compliance responsibility, but that's that would occur only on a complaint-based model. Somebody complains, they'll come check it out.
Yeah. People will come check it out. And the governor actually put a big emphasis yesterday on, this is not the policing kind of model at all.
Right.
If a Labor Cabinet representative goes to a site, there's a conversation expected about, what's going on. Is it how big a problem is it? What are you doing to conform and comply? What sort of measures can we take to improve? That would really be the motivation.
And I would say the idea here is that if you want to stay in business and continue to grow your business, these are great ideas for doing that. So your people want to be there, they'll work hard, they stay safe, healthy. These are just great guidelines for what it's going to take to do business going forward. So,
I think, Lyle, you said something really valuable there that's often overlooked. How many, sometimes it takes a little time to acquire the understanding and the knowledge, the experiential knowledge that when you take care and it's clear that you're taking care of the people that work in whatever the organization is. I learned that in the private sector, believe it, and I've seen it in the public sector. If it's clear that you're working on the benefit of the employees and everyone working with the institution, then there's going to be a healthier just a better workforce, a better environment. And I think what you said is really relevant. When people know you're thoughtful about them and their health and their welfare, then you're going to have a better workplace.
Yeah. I didn't give you all Jim's full background, but most of you know that he's been very active his entire life with Gray Construction, which is now a $1.5 billion organization. He serves as the chair and is still active in that organization. So he has the hands-on experience. Allison, do you have any questions for Jim?
So we do have a question about the restaurant industry and if we anticipate mask regulations being put in place for that industry as well. Which I feel like,
I'm sorry, Allison, I got restaurant industry, but that's as far as I got.
okay, yeah, the question is, well, we ask if mask regulations and restaurant workers can be put into place. They love to support local restaurants, but I'm disappointed when staff isn't wearing masks when they do pick up.
Yeah, you know, I emphasize the flexibility of this approach. And I think when we're talking about restaurants, we are really talking about the need to be flexible in terms of timing and in terms of protocol. Because there's arguably no place, you know, that's one of the real challenges. It's like so many of us, you know, there's a socializing dynamic to restaurants. There certainly has been historically for us. And we also know that the longer someone's in the restaurant and in close proximity to others, the higher the chance of exposure. So that's a work in progress. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that?
Somebody needs to mute their phone. Autumn, can you mute that person?
There was guys on the line that all you had to do is mention it.
All right, Jim.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes, so as these benchmarks, sorry, I got distracted. As these benchmarks are being kind of measured and evaluated along the way, do you anticipate that there will continue to be social distancing regarding the minimum number of people who can be in one location?
Oh, okay. I think I didn't quite hear you completely, Allison, but you were talking about social distancing requirements for minimum number of people who can be in one location. The primary driver is the social distancing. And I think as we move downstream, I mean, there are issues that I was just reading about yesterday about, you know, if you've got in dense areas or cities where you've got a bunch of people getting in an elevator and having to work through those issues. All of these are issues that I think are part of this exercise of getting through as we reopen, just the process of working through these, if you will, the problems. You know, there are opportunities for us. The main theme, however, is the social distancing.
Got it.
Okay, if you've got a lot of people on this agenda, and I know, Lyle, you said you wanted me for 15 minutes, and I've already gone to 24. So
all right.
I don't want to take too much of your time because you got some great folks on this on the roster.
Well, Jim, we really appreciate your being with us today. Stay on as long as you'd like, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, thanks so much.
We're going to stay up on the governor's presentations in the evening and all work together to try to move us forward.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker needs no introduction if you've been on these calls before. Jim Morris is an attorney, and he's been keeping up with all the goings on in Washington and so forth. Jim, what do you have for us today?
All right, so not as much yet on the regulatory front from the PPP Part 2, but we do have some information I'm going to share with everybody. Again, as I said last week, I'm trying no longer to have the appearance slides and things going in because I want you to have the information in front of you as much as possible. So this has been commonly called the phase 3.5 because it's not truly the next phase. It's kind of additional funding on the previous phase because they ran out. As we mentioned last week, There was a complete exhaustion of all funding on April 16th of the original PPP. If you'll recall, and you need to go back to week 4 or week 3, I covered it in both. The PPP is based upon 2.5 months worth of your salaries and wages from last year, and you get to write off the first 8 weeks this year after you receive it. Money ran out in 13 days on $349 billion. So Congress got together. It took them way too long again. Again, not a political comment, but just a frustration at the fact that it takes them that long because people are trying to throw more things in there that really had nothing to do with it. And the argument to say that small businesses shouldn't be getting money and that they needed to give money to the general people was really kind of foolish, because the small businesses have to flip this money around and pay it to payroll. So it actually was helping all the small people, as they called them. Not my word, it was theirs. But here's phase 3.5. It's a $484 billion assistance package. $370 billion is for small business. That's allocated at $310 billion for the PPP. $60 billion of that is for the small lenders. So if you went to your local, like Central Bank, they've allocated specific monies to those small lenders to try to assist and make sure that we have sufficient monies there. Additionally, $50 billion was put into the EIDL. That is and I've been calling the other one the EIDG, but this time just to delineate between the two. $50 billion set aside for the loans. Those are through the SBA. $10 billion for the EIDL grants. Those are the up to $10,000. And as I explained to you a couple of weeks ago, that's actually $1,000 per employee. No, that's not to pay your employee, but that's how they're delineating who's going to get what in the grant money itself. So if you have 6 employees, you get $6,000, and it's used for payroll and other things. If you get the PPP, it's rolled up into it. So keep that in mind. You don't get to use 2 funding sources for one event. You're going to see that throughout this discussion. There's also $75 billion for hospital funding, $25 billion for COVID-19 testing. Just put that in so that you could add things up, and that comes pretty close to the total. There's a few other small things in there. So as of this morning at 10:30 a.m., the SBA announced the resumption of receipt of applications. Now that's for the PPP. They are also reopening their website for the EIDL and the EIDG. If you have not taken advantage of those 3, you need to do so immediately, because there is limited funding available. If they went through $349 billion in 13 days and nobody knew to apply at the very beginning, unless you were listening to us, nobody knew to apply for the EIDG, EIDL, and the PPP on April 3rd, April 4th, April 5th. We started to get warnings on April 7th that they were starting to run out. Now, most of the banks continued to process the loans. So those have been in the queue waiting for the SBA to open, and those were dumped on the SBA this morning. So expect a tremendous amount of the the PPP money to be exhausted immediately, but then there will be a lag. So if you can get those in, get them in. The thing I would caution everyone on is, if you're submitting an application, one, this is only going to last a matter of days. 2, be careful your first submission is accurate, because you won't get a second chance, in my personal opinion, based upon how much went through the system before. By the time your bank actually reviews your loan, sends you an email, asks you to make the changes, you make the changes, and then they re-review it, there won't be any money left. I think you probably got until about Thursday or Friday of this week. But make darn sure you make your calculations correctly. One of the things that we've noticed people messed up on the most is the understanding of the cap. So if any of your employees are above $100,000 a year, The instructions originally were a little confusing, so people were including their full payroll because that's what it asked for. But you are to reduce that to $8,333.33 so that you stay under the $100,000 threshold for the year. Make sure all of your submissions are accurate, all of your current payroll is accurate. It also asked for the first quarter, but nobody had finished their first quarter. So attach last quarter, attach current paychecks, attach current Kentucky tax records, anything you have to show that people were employed in February and March, because that's one of the other areas that got rejected. Again, time is of the essence, and don't delay. So, got some questions on this, so I wanted to throw this in there. The PPP loan is forgiven to the extent it's utilized in the first 8 weeks. I had been asked this, and I said, surely to goodness our government will be intelligent enough and not force you to use this even though your business is closed. I was wrong. Again, as I told you, and I'll say the caveat again this week, my information is only as good as the information that's out there. The guidance is not catching up with the statute. This is one where I think that the government has really screwed up. The DOL, the Treasury, the Congress on 3.5, everybody has screwed this up, because there's no way that you should be forced to pay your employees if your employees can't work. So if you got 3.0 money, chances are that 3.0 money has problems, because you have to start spending that money starting right now. You can't wait on the spending of money until you open your business. You have 8 weeks to spend it. And if you don't spend it, then you have to start paying it back. So I have no answer for you. It's ironic the 3.5 people are going to benefit from this more than the 3.0, simply because the time that they get their money is closer to the time when the businesses are actually opening. But if you get your approval, you have to start spending that money, or after that 8 weeks cuts off, you're going to have to start paying it back. The good news is, and this is the point down here at the bottom, let me get my highlighter on. It is at 1%. That's another thing that I was wrong on. I wanted to correct. Again, I'm trying the best I can to give you information every week. I look back at what I've done, and half of it ends up being wrong, and I apologize, but that's not on me. So PPP has to be 8 weeks. 75% must be used for payroll. That includes wages, salaries, any type of payment, including tips, capped at $100,000, benefits, sick leave, and SALT. SALT, state and local tax assessed on payroll. So SALT, again, it's not spelled out for space consideration. State and local tax for payroll purposes or compensation purposes. You can pay the rest of it on loans, rent, leases, utilities. Now, I had a question last week. Somebody said, wait, seriously, I can pay off my car? And my answer was yes, because a lot of people are not giving that information. It includes any type of lease, computer lease, phone lease. If it's on a mortgage, you can only use interest. If it's on anything else, it can cover any type of leases at all. Also covers utilities. One caveat, again, going back to previous weeks, February 15th, 2020, you must have had that in existence. You can't do it if it didn't exist prior to that date. Don't go out and buy an iPhone 10 and try to write it off if you didn't already have it. Again, interest is only 1%. It's a 100 basis points above prime. Prime is 0. So that's a clarification. We were at 3.25 in the past. My apologies. That was guidance that came out after the fact. Companies need to make a hard decision about paying employees to work from home, selecting certain employees only, or holding the monies and using a 1% interest rate. I'll give you an example I've got in Chicago. I've got a manufacturer in Chicago that has high-level people as well as factories in Chicago, USA-based business. Moved everything back from China. Problem that he had was he can't get any orders filled because nobody's ordering anything. So we had to have a heart-to-heart discussion about what to do with this. So what he's going to do is bring back all of his high level, And if this sounds wrong, I'm sorry, but this is what the guidance is. Bring back all of the high level, bring back all of the mid-level, build up all of the structure, be ready for all of the orders, hire back all of the manufacturing before the deadline of June 30th. Then he gets 100% written off for the 8 weeks. The remainder that he has will help cover payroll once they come back to work. And those people will be hired back and start as soon as possible, but they'll all be hired back before June 30th. That's the little catch that I told everybody about. The little glitch in the law was they didn't require you to hire people back until June 30th. As long as you hire them back, you get 100% of whatever you paid for the 8 weeks. That may not help the factory workers, but he has no work for the factory workers until the business reopens. So he's paying all of his high-level, mid-level management, salespeople, and so on, and then triggering it on June 30th. Keep that in mind, might work for you. No double dipping is allowed. This is what I was talking about before. We talked about this in week 2. If you receive the PPP and the EIDL grant, the grant is deducted. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act forgiveness under Section 7001, 7003 that I mentioned before precludes sick leave forgiveness under the PPP. It's not that you can't do it, it's just that you can't claim it twice. If Lyle's sick under one, you're not going to be able to get Lyle sick under both and pay him under both. So just keep that in mind. One of the other things that we've had discussion about is the employer retention credits. And I have not spoken much about this because, quite honestly, it gets into a lot of confusion. But there is some information on there you need to make some decisions about because, one, you may not be able to get your PPP, or two, you may not want to have full people back to work first 8 weeks and then be precluded from doing other things. So small businesses need to figure out what works best for them, especially if you can't open. If you're not able to open, elect not to open. I'm sorry, if you are not able to or elect not to receive PPP, there are some other options available. You've heard me talk about the EIDL funding, 1% interest rate, 30-year term, no personal guarantees, a lot of other things we covered in week 2. Go back and take a look. That's still all valid. The only thing that's not valid about what I said in week 2 was it's a free $10,000 and you're all going to get $10,000. They came out and said, no, everybody's going through the money too quick, so we're basing it on the number of employees. The other thing you can get is called the employer retention credits. They wanted people to keep employees on the payroll. So there's a fully refundable tax credit equal to 50% up to $10,000. And they went through all of these calculations and make it really confusing. But the gist of it is, if, for example, somebody makes $8,000 in a quarter, you can write off $4,000. If they make $8,000 the next quarter, you can only write off $1,000. It's a total of $5,000. Doesn't matter when it gets burned. $5,000 per employee, half of their wages. You get to write off of your taxes, and you get to withhold. And I'll explain down below how. Time period is from March the 12th, 2020 through the end of the year. Maximum qualified, again, $5,000. You applied against your Social Security taxes. If you applied against Social Security and that's not good enough or not enough, then you get to get offset on any payments that you have to make on your taxes, dollar for dollar. And then you can offset it in other ways as well if that's not sufficient. Question I was asked was, is this available to my specific type of business? If you're a non-government, the answer is yes, with one caveat, and I cover it below. So if you are a non-government business that has to partially or fully suspend operations due to the quarantine or any other, and they spell out 10 other ways to call it a quarantine, that's everybody nationwide. So you don't have to worry about whether there's been a partial or full suspension unless you're a hospital, unless you're a restaurant. But even then, the only restaurant I could think of that literally may not, and I bet they still applied, was Rally's, because Rally's has no dining room. The partial suspension includes any forced restrictions upon a business operation due to COVID-19. So the example given was, if you ran a restaurant, you have a dining room and a drive-through, and now you only have a drive-through. Well, that means that it impacted your business. If you have a bank and now you're only doing drive-through, you're not doing your business inside, that impacted your business. It described all different kinds of businesses. It basically said any impact in any COVID-19 shutdown or partial suspension, forced or otherwise. So then the other two things are, or the other part of that is, or. So the first part is, it's available to anyone who has a partial or full suspension. Well, that's almost everyone. Kroger's is open, it doesn't apply to them. Gas stations are open, doesn't apply to them. Hospitals are open, but yet they've had their non-essential cut out. So they've been had partial suspension. Or you've experienced a significant decline in gross quarterly receipts, and there's a calculation, and it's basically 80% or less of your 2019 quarters, then you get to claim it as well. So it's an or. Partial or full suspension of operations or a significant decline. The interplay is with the FFCRA, you can't pay the same wages. Again, no double dipping. And you cannot receive the PPP and claim the employee retention credit. So there is some interplay there about whether you can do it outside of timeframes, but the gist right now is one or the other, don't do both. So that's the ERC with the information. So there's some issues legally. I didn't get into a whole lot of this, but I just want you to know there are some of us attorneys out there looking for a way to make a buck. There's some of them that have gone after China, and when I saw the lawsuit against China, I think that the lawsuit against China was kind of silly because he hasn't framed it in the right method, and he says he's going after the Communist Party. And I listened to some of what he was saying, and I thought, wow, I'm not sure he's the right person to do a class action. Having done some of them, when I looked through his, I was like, don't join his, join somebody else's, because he's not really on top of it. But he did get on TV, so there's that. But the first lawsuit has been filed in the United States against an employer. It was against Walmart in Illinois. It was based upon the willful and wanton misconduct and reckless disregard for the health and safety of employees. If you recall, in week 1, all the way back 6 weeks ago, I talked about the need for a crisis plan. You needed to have steps in place. You need to have a team. This was why. Believe it or not, of all the people, Walmart apparently had no controls in place. They had an employee that was infected multiple other employees. People were exposed to the general public. There were no safeguards taken. Nothing was done quick enough. They've had at least 2 employees die at this particular Walmart due to the lack of any cleaning. And whether it's true or not, again, they haven't put their side out there yet, so I'm not accusing them. But just so you know, when I gave the caution, they're basically using OSHA, CDC, state, and federal that existed at that time, and they're pointing out that Walmart did not adhere to the current OSHA, current CDC, and the state and federal recommendations for protecting their employees. Again, this emphasizes the need for a crisis preparedness plan with an appropriate response team. If you don't have it, you need to get one, and you need to get one quick, especially if you're going to reopen. You need some legal guidance on this. This is not a ploy for me. I'm just telling you the reality is that this is pretty serious stuff, because you'll see in the second part, workers' comp, it's creating a lot of problems. You also need to contemporaneously document the current information that impacts the decision you're making. And what do I mean by that? I gave you guidance in week 1. It was based upon the information I had in week 1. I gave you guidance in week 2. It was based on the week 2 and week 1 guidance. I went through and adjusted and corrected some of it, even on the frequently asked questions after we're done. I've apologized and said, sorry, here's the additional information. Everything changed. New regulation came out. You need to be able to document where you were at that point in time, and the reason why you took the action you took on that particular day, because it changes every single day. If you don't document it, you try to go back and look and you can't pull it up, you're going to be in a hard-pressed situation if you get sued by an employee, independent contractor, or the general public who you've invited into your location as to whether you have appropriate safeguards in place. You need to also engage in active communication with your managers and employees and document those conversations. Emails are great. That way, if you're asked, why didn't you tell us to wear masks, or we were refused the ability to wear masks, and you have an email and you say, oh no, it's right here. We said, please wear your masks. Don't get within 6 feet, taping on the floor, 6 feet apart at all registers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to be in trouble if you don't have proof of that. Take pictures, keep emails, verify what you're doing, and please make sure your employees follow through, because you don't want to get sued by, especially like a restaurant, you don't want to get sued by a customer that claims to have gotten COVID-19 because you didn't keep things clean. Workers' comp. Several states have already taken action, Kentucky's not one of them yet, to call COVID-19 a compensable illness. This is going to create a critical issue, and it also adjusts the guidance I gave you in week 4 and week 5. I was asked about essential businesses, actually all the way back to week 2. Hey, we got people asking because they're opening the mail, can we pay them a little extra for hazard pay? And I said, don't know that opening the mail qualifies, but face-to-face with customers, and we've had a cute phrase being used, it's not hazard pay, it's extraordinary employee pay and other little things. If you're calling it hazard pay, this could have a backlash, and I don't have any legal guidance because Kentucky hasn't adopted it. All the states that have adopted it have not yet gotten to the point of us being able to give you guidance. But if you call it hazard pay and you're giving somebody a quarter an hour raise because of working around COVID-19, then they claim to have COVID-19 and they're going to try for workers' comp, you're going to end up in a drowning mess of workers' comp litigation on COVID-19. And I see this being a secondary wave of problems for employers going through workers' comp problems, because now you're going to have everybody, it's going to be asbestos on steroids, because asbestos and black lung disease, all of the workers' comp, I don't do that kind of, I give guidance, but I don't do the workers' comp litigation. But I see this being a way for some of the employees that may not have it to try to use this as an advantage to get paid to stay home. So it's going to be a ridiculous problem if they don't take some measures to stop it. The third thing is, I said this in week 5, I just want you to be aware, and they've expanded it with some additional guidance. There's also some brand new OSHA on masks and so on. It just came out on Friday, but I'd already covered a lot of OSHA last week, and I'd already really covered everything they put in on Friday. EEOC has approved COVID-19 testing. You still have to maintain confidentiality. Any medical information you receive, don't use it. Put it in the red file like I've talked about all 6 weeks. And the last thing on that topic is, I usually recommend, if you can afford it, to have a third party doing your testing. Why? Because then you don't have a chance of supervisory or HR being involved in doing a temporal check, the forehead, that you're allowed to do only during the CDC pandemic, or any of the COVID-19 that may then reveal that, no, I don't have COVID-19, but I have brain cancer, or I have liver disease, or anything else that then could be used under the ADA. All of the ADA still applies, and one of the questions that's been asked a lot of me is, what do I do with my older workers? I want to save them, I want to protect them, I don't want them to get ill, so I'm not going to put them into harm's way. That's called discrimination. You need to have a heart-to-heart discussion with your employees. You need to tell them the steps you want to take. But if an elderly employee wants to work and wants to meet and greet, I'm looking back at the Walmart example, you can't stop them from wanting to do that, because if you do and you keep them at home, that's discrimination. One last thing I wanted to touch on is the unemployment insurance issues. We had someone on in week 3, I believe, from the system. Their names are at the bottom. And I put it on here on purpose because the system is just flat broken. We were told it was not broken. There's been a system-wide shutdown as of yesterday for updates. Those updates didn't happen because when we started this meeting, I just felt the need to drag this down on the screen. If you tried to log in, server you're trying to access is either busy or experiencing difficulties. Please close the web browser, open a new one, and try again at 11:03. I only did that because you'll remember when I started to explain the problems with the website, Josh and Muncie from the unemployment said, oh, no, our website's working just fine, no problems. Well, it's still crashing nonstop. I have a call on behalf of a client that I made on Monday, I guess it was April the 11th. I've gotten 2 follow-up calls at 7:30 at night, robocalls explaining that your call is very important to us. Please stand by. We'll be getting back to you. It's been almost 3 weeks, no call back. The last one I received was Friday night at 7:30. My call is very important to him. Wrong information on the employer guidelines. They talk about salaries. Salaries do not matter. I'm going to correct him again. He said if you're paying salaries, you have a contract, you don't have a contract. They're all at will unless you have a contract. And at will and salaries are completely different from whether they're exempt or non-exempt. Exempt and non-exempt runs into 4 things. Are they a supervisor, an administrator, professional, or an executive? If you're paying salaries to someone that doesn't fall into those categories, supervisories, 3 or more employees that they supervise, professionals are attorneys, doctors, accountants, etc., an advanced level degree. Executive is exactly what it sounds like, somebody who's a high-level worker. And administrative is someone who's actually an administrator for an entire business or a segment of business. If you're paying someone a salary, but they're truly not, they are entitled to use WorkShare. So they're just wrong on that as well. So the guidelines, be careful with those. Identically situated employees are not getting the same treatment. Keep sending them emails. We had a situation where we've got multiple people in the exact same job. Some of them are getting their benefits. Others still 3 weeks later are not. Some are getting state but not federal. Others are getting federal because they don't qualify for state even though they're in the same job as everyone else. We've got situations that we've heard about, and I know I've spoken to Lyle about, where employees are just walking off the job because they'll make more at home. And the employer immediately objects and says, these people walked off. I've got work for them. Please send them back. And they're all getting full pay because the state's not watching it. There's no consistency, no accountability, and 0 explanations. And so I apologize, but when it's been 3 weeks and all of this, and I've sent private emails saying I'm going to jump on this if I don't get any explanation because I'm seeing it firsthand trying to help employers through this. I sent an email 2 weeks ago, an email last week, and an email this morning, still haven't gotten it back. So feel free to reach out if you're having problems personally or on behalf of your companies. Fax numbers aren't working. No emails are going through to the system. Employers can't timely respond to get their employees on unemployment. Those are the people to contact. Each one of them are listed there. And I'm sorry, but we need to have our systems work better than that. So that's the status from an employment law perspective.
Thank you,
There you
Jim.
go.
You drummed up some questions there. We're going to have to keep
A little
moving
spicy
some.
at the end. Sorry about that.
Give him the toughest ones, Allison, and we'll keep moving here.
All right. So we had someone ask, is the 75% of the paycheck protection having to be used for payroll? Is that an all or nothing? Like, is the 25% forgivable for rent and utilities if they use it correctly, even if they don't do 75% for payroll?
No, but there is a reduced amount of what's being waived. So this is the forgiven calculation. And this kind of falls in line with the other calculation, which is how many employees do you have now versus how many employees did you have last year. So if you hire them back before June 30th, then you have a full calculation. However, if you're not using it all for payroll, then they're going to slam you with, not slam you, they're going to reduce how much you can forgive based upon whether you're within that calculation or not. I think it was week 4, we went through some really detailed calculations. Go back and take a look at that. It did not get into the level of depth of, hey, what if we don't meet the 75%, 25%? But I don't believe it's an all or nothing. I believe it's a sliding scale. I will follow up on that because that particular question has not been asked of me. I have had, I will tell you, I have had some employers make the decision that because they don't think they can open and make this worthwhile, they're just going to take it at the 1% interest. And I've encouraged them to rethink that strategy and to try to figure out at least some method of payment for some of their exempt employees that they have back at work right now, and then hire everybody back before June 30th. But then the one thing that I have not been asked, and I guess it's just the size of the companies versus their factory payments, is the lease payments versus the 75%. So I'm gonna check on that if that's all or nothing. So please don't rely on that until I can verify. I try to be prepared, but that's not one that I've had yet. So thank you.
Let's see. We also got a question about the unforgivable loan portion and how long the payback terms are. I guess there's been some conflicting information. Do you know what the payback terms are?
On which one? On the EIDL or on the PPP?
Sorry, the Paycheck Protection.
The Paycheck Protection Plan, we covered the exact amount on that, and I don't have it memorized, but we covered that in week 3. Go back and look at the slides that are on the Hanna Resource group for week 3. But my understanding is that there's 0 payments due for 2020. It starts in 2021. And I think you have 2 years to pay back whatever you don't use, but don't quote me on that. I'm going to do an FAQ. And I want to go back and verify the payment. I know the EIDL is a long-term loan. That's the one that's at 30 years. But I think the PPP, for some reason, I think it had a 2-year payback starting, but you don't have to pay anything this year. And it's a 1% interest. I know the 1%'s on there. Let me verify when it starts and what the terms are. And I'll do that during the next phase, and I'll probably have that to put down there at the end of the, as everybody knows, I'm usually dragging things down on the screen anyway, so I'll do some research on the payback on that. Actually, I've got it on my screen, so give me well, ask the next question, and I'll drag it down there once I do that.
Great. Okay, so is there any indication of a length of time that you have to retain rehired employees? So if you have to rehire them by June 30th, do they have to stay on the payroll for any particular amount of time?
So the guidance I've been giving, unless I get something else from the DOL, the Department of Treasury, or anything else, the guidance I've been giving to people is I'm recommending very heavily, go ahead and hire your people. And then once you've hired your people, keep them on for the 8 weeks. When the 8 weeks are done, put them back on furlough, put them back on work share. If they qualify for work share, it's great to put them on the work share program. Whatever they qualify for, I would keep them fully employed for the 8 weeks and then roll them into something else, because you have the ability. Trying to pull the other thing up. You have the ability to take the 8 weeks, and then there's no limit on that. It does not tell you then, okay, you have to shut it down after, or you have to keep them employed for a certain amount of time. So what I've recommended, the factory in Chicago, this is what I begged them to do, and we're still trying to work through some of the details. I said, I think you need to go to 3 shifts. You need to work around the clock, whether you have orders or not, because they don't go bad. This is a type of product that is not like a shelf life product. I said, work around the clock, build as many as you can, because the government's going to give you free money for 8 weeks. Free money. Work them around the clock. Lay them off at the 8 weeks. Your employees will be happy because they get the last time period of the federal money. You're happy because you have all of your product built up and the government's paying you. And he's like, well, I think I'm going to go for the 1% interest because we'd like to have cash on hand. And I said, let me be clear here. 1% interest versus zero repayment is a huge delta between the two. You need to be really careful. So he's thinking of a hybrid way to do it, like I said, where he's going to try to pay the exempt, but not the factory workers. You know, I'm retained general counsel, so I have to be careful in telling people I disagree, you can't do that. I told him I think that you need to get your accountant involved, because I think financially it's better to get it free and work like crazy for 8 weeks than you are to 1% interest. But every business has to look at it differently, and so that's his decision. But I'd very strongly consider you employ them for the 8 weeks and then lay them back off. And it's not that you're doing anything wrong, it's that the government's willing to pay you for 8 weeks. The other thing, last week we gave guidance on this. If you do get the 8 weeks, and you have to start it right now or else you're just going to lose it. If people are stuck at home and you have any ability to have them work from home, do it. We actually have a shop that we work for that retained counsel, small retail establishment, only limping along. And their people have to work. It's more mechanical. They don't have the ability to have, you know, computer. I told them, I said, okay, pay them for 8 weeks. Have them all get electronic training. Have them all get online educations. Pay them to get their educations. Pay them to get their continuing educations. Pay them to get more certifications that make you better on the other end. And that, so there's a lot of people saying, hey, have them get their certification in computer technology, whatever. So figure out creative ways if you're going to do that. So I've got your answer on the other one. So you want to go back to that? Ask me another one, then we'll get to that one later.
We need to keep moving too. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, we've got about 15 questions here, so you all just have to stop.
Let me just put this on the screen, Lyle, really quick.
Okay.
Interest rate's 1%. You need to start paying your loan after 6 months. Interest will continue to accrue over the 6 months. Must be paid within 2 years. You can pay it earlier than 2. There's no prepayment. There is zero collateral available. My source for this, I don't go cheap. My source is the Treasury Department right here. So I don't want to give you information that's not accurate. This is the information. It is 6-month deferral, 2-year payment, no prepayment penalty. Sorry about that, Lyle. I just wanted to cover that to make sure. We can cover any additional questions at the end if we have time, and if not, we'll do a FAQ. I'm trying to catch as many as I can. Also, there's next week.
Well, I've got a section here. I'll try to go through it really fast, and then we've got Brian's got some things to share. So we'll try to see if we have some time at the end. We may have to go back to 2 hours next time. Go ahead, next slide here. So if you're going to reopen, you got to figure out, you know, how you got the people issue to deal with, but you've also got the place issue. How do you keep the people clean? How do you keep people safe and the area clean? So I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about, you know, risk management and cleaning. And so basically, there's a tactical side of this and there's a strategic side of it. And the tactical has to do with, what are you going to clean? You got to have a detailed plan, and it's a great idea to document this plan. So if you're ever asked, you can show we did this, this, and this, many things to make sure it works. But there's also the thoughtful piece of it, and that is you're trying to get a message across here. You're trying to let your employees know you really care about them, and you're trying to keep them safe, and you're trying to send the same message to your customer, depending on what kind of business you're in. So I want to go through. I actually received this information from the senior risk manager for a major retail organization. He wasn't able to join the call, but he asked me to share this with you. So he says, you can see the slides here, but you know, you got to really, whatever you do, you got to check what you do. You got to get your team on board so that they know how to check it in the future. And you know, people do what we measure. So measure them so you keep getting better and better results. Next slide. So the first question is, where do you clean? And you got to think about how you can go ahead and go through all these, just put the whole list down there. You know, high traffic areas, that's obvious. You got to walk around, and this guy says he walks around with a notepad and a pen, so everybody can see him doing it. You can get input from people if there's anybody there working right now, and you got to figure out what are the things that people touch most. You know, what do they get up against? Where are they in confined spaces? All those kinds of things that we've been talking about here. You need to identify all those because you take different remedies for different ones. So what you're trying to do is really be careful to hit places where you have germs, bacteria, virus, where they could be picked up through contact or through, you know, casual, just breathing the air. Next page. And so there's some things that are obvious. Where to clean, you know, like entryways, breezeways, trash cans, restrooms, doorknobs, all that kind of stuff. But there are other things that might not be so obvious. So like in a grocery store, one of the places that gets a lot of traffic are those freezer doors, refrigerator doors. People are always opening those things up, putting their hands on them, but that's something that grocery stores have realized they got to really keep those things clean. They get more touches than many, many other places in the store. So you got to think about in your organization, what are the things that get the most? Is it a machine, a cash register? Is it a card reader? Is it a keyboard? You know, or the tablets? Think about all those kind of things. Clearly, there are issues about break rooms too. A lot of people are already expanding their break rooms because you got to put half as many tables in there now, and you may have the same number of people. So important to look at that closely. Now, when to clean? A lot of judgment involved with this, but some things need to be done all the time. A buddy of mine just went to a bank and they have a teller outside, and somebody was there actually cleaning the thing off. They said, just a moment, cleaned it off, let the car proceed up there. So they were actually outside doing that. And what kind of message does that send to customers? It's pretty important because you think about that crazy teller that you pull up to. A lot of hands touch that thing during the day. So some people are going the extra mile. And that starts moving towards the strategy here. It's not just to keep it clean, but it's also to let people know you're keeping it clean and your employees know you're keeping it clean. So this guy says they don't skimp on labor, make good decisions, and do everything you can to keep people healthy and safe, because that's got to be the number one priority. Next slide. Now, what do you clean with? Well, you know, there are all kinds of chemicals that you can use, but this guy says talk to your provider because they can tell you, and make sure people read the directions, because a lot of people are cleaning with stuff but not doing it the way it's supposed to be done. So that's kind of a waste of time and energy. So educate your team on these products. Get the experts in to educate your team on the products, the people that sold you the stuff. That kind of summarizes most of that. So there's some good things down there. The last note is a big one. It says use HR and people metrics. So figure out, you know, where your people are most, and then put your attention to where most of the people are going to be gathered. So let's go to the next slide. Now, who should do the cleaning? Well, any way you can free up people to help do it. You may have people that are not normally in those jobs. You're going to have to shift some people to do more of it. And they say, you know, have a station in your organization where people go to get the stuff. So they need hand wipes, they need other kinds of things. Go there, and it gives you a chance to talk to those people when they come around, so you continue to coach them on how they're using these things. So when you get people back in the workplace, you're going to need a place that is a point of focus for the cleaning materials and stuff like that, to keep teaching people how you do it and keep them after it. And they also said, this is kind of important, this is more the strategy, and that is make sure our leaders are out there doing some of the cleaning, so they get the point across that this is everybody's responsibility. So it's okay to lead by example, and keep asking people for feedback, so we get better and better at this as we go. Jim? So that we're down to this is the real strategy, the perception of care, because you're not trying to just do it, but you're trying to make sure people know you're doing it and they're comfortable with you doing it, and they know you care about them, and that's why you're willing to spend the extra money on extra wipes and masks and other guards and stuff, so that they realize that they're going to be safe there. And you know what? The last bullet here, this is a time that we can be leveraged to continue to build our customer base and our employee base, that we generally care about this. And I think that's a really important message. I've talked to a lot of HR people. You know, we run HR in a bunch of companies, and we help a lot of others. And they're saying, this is where we make the impression so that people want to come back if they're off, that they'll stay, we get better, long-term commitment out of people. Let's take care of them. Let's do it right. And so I think it's a good message to take forward. Next slide. Yeah, that wraps up my part. I'm not going to take any questions right now. We'll see if there's some at the end, because I'm excited about Brian Richter, who's here. And I want Brian to have some time to talk. If you want to flip to the next slide. Oh, I do have a special one in here. Wait a minute, before Brian. Some of you know that a couple of weeks ago, we had Joe Bon Jovi. He's the CHRO for Sazerac, which is Buffalo Trace. And they are actually making hand sanitizer. And I've heard some people say to me, I can't get enough hand sanitizer. You can't get it at Costco, can't get it at Kroger. Well, guess what? You go to the Buffalo Trace Distillery.com website, and you can buy it right there. And it seems like I hear it's pretty cheap. And there you go. Pick up some bourbon while you're there. No, you probably can't do that. But
In the gift shop.
you can, you can get online. You can order up to 5 1.75 liter bottles of the stuff at any one time. And so I've already worked with a dental office recently to get some of that ordered. So that's just something to watch for. So now we're going on here. Because I'm going to get Brian Richter up here, and I asked him to come talk to us about PPE, because he has a company out of Nashville called PPE2USA. You can go to that website. It's www.ppe2usa.com. And he's going to talk to us about what are all the options out here? What do you need to have for your organization, and where might you get it? Brian, take it away.
Wow, thank you very much. If everybody needs to take just a few minutes and do some jumping jacks and sit back down with us, I completely understand, and I'll get rolling here and be as succinct as I can. So, but I think we've all heard in the news for several weeks, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx have been talking about the importance of wearing masks and how easily the virus is spread, and it sits on surfaces and it's spread through the air. And we've heard Jim Gray and all of us on the call today that it's important for us to think about ourselves, of course, but more importantly, think of everyone as we do this and take care of the elderly and the immunocompromised and work from there. And we've all been working with social distancing and rotating schedules, allowing employees to work from home and things like that. And we are social, so I know everybody's struggling with lockdown fatigue. And we're excited to get back to work and some of the things that we've talked about to build confidence so that we can make that happen as quickly and smoothly as we can. But the PPE is the focus, and several segments of our job markets are familiar with this on a daily basis with healthcare and manufacturing and research and construction. But it's now becoming mainstream, and it's something that we all need to embrace and bring in as part of what we have on our daily work environments. So we've worked extremely hard to flatten the curve over the last 6 to 8 weeks, and we've done it. We've managed to not overwhelm our healthcare system completely, and we've managed this first wave. So we've kind of reached a crossroads at this point. So if you can flip over to the next slide. It's not a time to relax. It's a time that we can continue to move forward, and if we stay diligent with what we're doing, then we can not only flatten the curve, but we can squash it and make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. There's a little insert there about the time of the Spanish flu in 1918 through 1920. They had basically done a lot of the things that we've been through the last 6 weeks. And it got to the point that World War I ended, all the troops came home, and everybody just relaxed and became complacent about it. And actually more people died from the Spanish flu after the war than were actually killed in the war. So we can't lose focus on this. We've got to stay diligent and keep moving forward. So we need to make sure that we protect ourselves, like I said, and keep subsequent waves from making us reclose what we're trying to reopen right now. So by minimizing the spread, we need to be wearing the masks and potentially gloves and face shields like we've talked about. And a lot of you are writing, and implementing new work policies and talking about training and doing all these things about cleaning and social distancing and things. And the time is now. So we're going to be fighting we're going to be fighting to overcome what we've experienced from shutting down our economy. So we need to find our new normal and keep moving forward from there. So there's really not a tried and true roadmap, and Lyle has started touching on some of the things that we need to do as we reopen. We don't really have experienced experts that have been through something like this before, but we've got the past to draw from, and we've got worldwide leaders that are working and are experts in the world to manage and make sure that we keep this on track. And as we create our own pandemic plans for reopening, we've got to draw from resources like the Litter Corporation has posted and made available a Safe Work Playbook, which you'll see a couple of pages from that workbook about PPE. So we're going to need, and what they recommend and what we're trying to help with is making sure that we confirm our stocks and we leave proper lead time for ordering in these stocks. And they're recommending that we have a 30-day supply on hand. So we need to identify a reliable source and have those on hand so that they're available as we work through our reopening. We want to protect, we can roll to the next slide. We want to protect employees and clients, customers and friends. And how do we do this? And Lyle just spent some time talking about cleaning of surfaces. And there are also some cleaning services that some businesses that don't have the manpower to do that on a regular basis can come in and help with that. We need to be diligent about our personal hygiene, and we need to make wearing PPE a part of our everyday functions for the coming future. And that's going to be for a duration of time. It's not something that we can stop and relax and do for a week and then just kind of let it go and become cavalier about it. But so we need not only to be ready for today and this week, this month, but we need to put this as part of our operating procedures for up to the next 18 months that they're potentially saying. So if we don't stay diligent, the past can repeat, and we've got examples of that. So flip over to that next slide, and I'm going to talk a little about the reopening real quickly. I've excerpted Governor Beshear's statements here from this last weekend about the reopening, and wanted to touch on real quickly one of the things he talks about procuring necessary PPE via normal supply chains. And I know there are some of us that probably have PPE as part of their normal supply chain, but I know my businesses and a lot of ours don't have that. So we need to create plan A and plan B to make sure that we add this to our supply chain. There's an article from the Wall Street Journal that's been published recently that basically calls the PPE market the Wild Wild West. And it's kind of all over the place right now, and we've got to be careful and be diligent about making sure that we're getting our PPE from a legitimate manufacturer, making sure that we adequately vet these, and we search for competitive pricing. I know we've seen masks online for up to $25, and that is just, it's way beyond what we're normally used to seeing, and we need to be able to verify availability. And again, just to reemphasize, we need plan A, and then if the supply is in such a great need right now, we need a plan B in our back pocket to make sure that we can keep that supply coming. So, and just to talk briefly, we've heard a lot about N95 masks in the news, and just to make sure everyone understands, that is something that has commonly been part of what the FDA has approved and what's in a lot of our hospitals and what we're used to hearing and seeing. But there's a technical bulletin I have on the next slide from 3M that actually notes and explains that there are a lot of other worldwide masks and things that we can reach out to that are equivalent to our N95s. So as the demand is growing and is so great, we can look beyond the N95s, and we've actually reached out and have been in touch with the FDA and talked to them about foreign manufacturers that are approved to be able to export to the U.S. And there's a emergency use authorization list of manufacturers that are approved to import into the U.S., and we can draw from those mask supplies to help meet demand. So there's KN95s are one that's commonly been talked about and seen in the media, and there are several others that are shown on the next slide from the technical bulletin from 3M. So just to reemphasize, N95s are not your only option. There are also 3-plies, and there are equivalents that the FDA has authorized for use. So we've got several different places that we can make sure that we can fit our needs as we reopen. And importantly about that, when we start wearing the PPE, we need to make sure that we use it and put it on and dispose of it properly. And so I've included a couple things on the next couple slides for masks and how to properly remove them after you've used them and dispose of them. And Jim, if you could flip to that quickly, and then the next slide after that, if you have gloves on, you can. There's a few step process there on how you work through removing the gloves and disposing of the gloves without contaminating other surfaces as you do that. And one of the things to add to this, and it's noted in there, but as soon as you take the gloves off, make sure you use hand sanitizer, wash your hands, and make sure that you clean and you employ those personal hygiene habits after the gloves are off and gone. So, and just to be clear too, the masks are generally intended for one-time use. So it's something that we've got to, have that supply in place so that we can make sure we don't potentially expose ourselves because of reusing masks or doing some things that would otherwise kind of raise the possibility of endangering ourselves a little bit. So, but if you want to flip back to the last slide, as we, in the coming weeks, we're all kind of working to create our own pandemic plan or return to work plan. We need to identify a team at work. Lyle had mentioned about training employees on what to clean, when to clean, and how to clean. And we have that response team that's kind of in place at work that can do and take care of a lot of these things and help everybody. And I think the key thing is that one of the key things Lyle was talking and mentioned was that we need to instill confidence, and we need to show that it's a priority for us as leaders of the companies and be involved and be out there cleaning with everybody, because we don't, as important as projecting that, we need to show that it is truly a priority for us. So, and again, the key thing, one of the key things when you start thinking about getting PPE for your businesses, is to make sure you identify a reliable supplier, that the products are going to be of quality, and also that they're going to be there when you need them. So make sure as you kind of reach out and resources, and my contact information is in here. And so you can review back on the presentation, and you can contact us, and we can help you kind of get in touch and get in line for some of that stuff as you need to. So, and based on the government recommendations, and we've heard Governor Beshear within the last few days, we all need to plan on wearing masks as we reopen. So it's something that we need to embrace and know it's not something that, we need to think about our social responsibility in that whole process. So, and one of the key things in touching back on the Spanish flu example I gave, and some of the things in the news that we've read recently, one person can potentially infect 59,000 people in a short process, in a short time frame. So it's not a time to relax, and we could put ourselves in a similar situation to what Japan has experienced that was in the news recently. As I close here, they managed to close the economy down. They flattened the curve as efficiently as they could, and they reopened without having a really quality plan in place. And now they're experiencing a second shutdown because of that. So I think we need to stay diligent, and everybody's here wanting to reopen and get back on track and get back outside and start experiencing life as getting back to normal as quickly as we can. So we just wanted to be here and share what we've learned and what we know about this process, and be here as a resource for anybody as they're getting prepared to reopen. So, Lyle, I think that's concludes where I am if there are any questions. So
great. We're about out of time, so I could say a lot of things. Thanks very much. Very helpful. If you go to his website, you notice you have to buy in pretty big quantities. If those quantities exceed what you want, give us a call. We'll work with them and figure out. They're putting groups of people together to do it. They're trying to bring this stuff in from outside the country, so a lot better deals if you buy in big quantities, and that's what they're doing. By the way, he put this company together just to do this, and he got this company certified by the state, Kentucky state, to be able to import things in here, and he's really just done a lot of work to try to make this happen. This hasn't been his business for years and years. Thank you very much, Brian. Allison, try to give us the biggest ones first. Got any questions?
We do have a question for Brian. Can you talk to us at all about infrared thermometers? It's a little bit outside of PPE, but people have been trying to locate them. Do you have any good advice on that?
Sure. We do have, and part of just to expand on what Lyle said for a second, I've had an architectural business for 20 years, and part of that was supplying goods to customers and things like that in that whole arena. And part of my network has allowed me to respond to this quickly, and we saw that we had all the parts and pieces in place. And but to answer the question about the thermometers, yes, we do potentially have those, and we can get those we can work to help get those as quickly as we can. So I know they're hard to find right now, but we have actually a trade secretary on our team that's in charge of a large manufacturing area. So we have him identifying and locating factories on a daily basis, making sure things are available and their quality. We have manufacturers in our group that have been been producing medical equipment for 45 years with 20 years of FDA certification. So yes, we can potentially, if we get the request, we can search out and try and get the thermometers for businesses.
Fantastic. And then, yeah, so a lot of these questions will have to be in the frequently asked questions. Jim's been able to hit a lot of them during this call. So if you have asked a question and haven't heard a response, check the chat and see if Jim has responded to you there. But one question we received is, if we have a pay date 3 days after the 8 weeks of the Paycheck Protection Loan is over, can they process payroll early in order to have it count?
You know, that's one that hasn't been answered in the regulations. It literally says you have 8 weeks, and I've had to tell people you have no ramp up time, you have no ability to do that. I believe what's going to happen is, first, this goes through the bank, so your bank's going to make the determination as to what is and is not forgiven. Sounds odd, but they are the representative of the SBA, so they will be the ones making the decision. I have a feeling that we're going to have some more guidance that comes out toward the end of the 8 weeks that says that so long as you're within a week of receipt and you start it within a week and you end it within a week, that you're going to be able to use it. But that's not legal guidance, again, because we can't get any information from the federal government on how to do that. My recommendation would be that you split that week into the 3 days. And actually, the other thing to think about is you get paid for the whole time period. For example, employees making more than $100,000, you can pay them $15,000 a month if you want. You just can't get more than $8,333 back from the government. So in your example of 3 days into the week and 2 days left, you're just going to claim the 3 days on the PPP and the other 2 days don't get claimed. But I do believe that there's going to be a little bit of a lag time. They're going to give us some more guidance toward the end of that 8 weeks to tell you how to ramp off of the PPP. It's kind of silly that they haven't given us a single instruction on any of it, how to start it, how to end it in the middle of a quarantine. So.
Good input. Somebody asked about Brian's website, and Allison responded, if you keep going to those chat things down below, we're answering questions right there. But his website is www.ppe2usa.com. Anything else, Allison?
I think that's probably all we have time to address.
Good. We're done. Gosh, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this is helpful. We're continuing to monitor your questions during the week. If you're struggling with whether you ought to bring your employees back, leave them out, all that kind of stuff, Jim is working that with companies every day, and we're helping him with it. So if you're struggling with that and want to talk about it, don't hesitate to give us a call. Keep letting us know what you want to hear about on this call. We've been coming back just by popular demand, so we'll probably do it again next week. And we look forward to seeing you. Hope you have a good week, and don't hesitate to call if you need help. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Stay safe, stay healthy.